présente le membre du comité d'audition, Len Katz, le vice-président des télécommunications, Peter Mendy, conseiller régional de l'Alberta. Je vous présente le membre du comité d'audition, Len Katz, le vice-président des télécommunications, Peter Mendy, conseiller régional de l'Alberta et des territoires du Nord-Ouest. Et moi-même, Conrad von Finkenstein, président du CRTC. Je vais présider l'audience. L'équipe de conseil qui nous assiste comprend notamment Lynn Renault, coordinatrice de l'audience et directrice des propriétés et acquisitions, Steve Millington et Liana Gates, conseillers juridiques, et Cindy Ventura, notre secrétaire de l'audience. Avec une infrastructure qui relie presque tous les foyers du pays, les communications jouent un rôle essentiel dans le développement économique et social du Canada. C'est pourquoi la loi sur les télécommunications stipule que les Canadiens doivent avoir le contrôle des entreprises de télécommunications. Elle précise aussi le niveau acceptable de propriété et de contrôle étranger. Under subsection 16.3 of the Act, a corporation is considered Canadian-owned and controlled if at least 80% of the members of its board of directors are Canadian. Canadians own, directly or indirectly, at least 80% of the voting shares that have been issued and are outstanding, and if it is not otherwise controlled by persons that are not Canadian. Globalive Wireless Management Corporation is a new company seeking to enter the Canadian wireless market. At this hearing, the Commission will consider whether Globalive is in compliance with Canadian ownership rules, which require that a telecommunications company be Canadian-owned and controlled, de jure and de facto at all times. This public review is being conducted under the Commission's new framework, which was introduced in July 2009. Globalive has submitted documentation indicating it has entered into a number of ownership and financial arrangements that are both complex and novel. Consequently, we determined that our review would benefit from the input of third parties during a public hearing. That's what we're doing today. As you know, a determination as to Globalive's Canadian ownership has already been conducted by Industry Canada. While the Commission and Industry Canada's determinations are made pursuant to different statutes, the test applied by both of us is essentially the same. Industry Canada made their determination under the Radio Communications Act at an earlier point in time and in the context of awarding a license pursuant to the Advanced Wireless Auction process. We are looking at the issue now under the Telecommunications Act in the context of a company that must establish a telecommunications network and operate as a telecommunications carrier. In effect, we are applying the same test, but in a different context and with a different focus. The first phase of the hearing will include public participation and take all of today. During the second phase, beginning tomorrow, the panel will question Globalive's representatives in camera about confidential materials. Only the panel, Commission staff, and representatives from Globalive will be in attendance during that phase. A redacted version of the discussion will be made available for the public record of any information that is not confidential. During the third phase, we will start at 4 p.m. tomorrow, The panel will hear closing arguments from parties in reverse order, i.e. starting with TELUS, Rogers, Bell Canada, and ending with Globalive. Our intention is to issue a decision on this matter within 30 days from the end of the hearing process. That's all I have to say by way of introduction. J'invite les secrétaires de l'audience, Madame Ventura, de faire quelques annonces quotidiennes. Madame Ventura.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, et bonjour à tous. Before beginning, I would like to go over a few housekeeping matters to ensure the proper conduct of the hearing. Le service d'interprétation simultanée est disponible durant cette audience. L'interprétation anglaise se trouve au canal 4 et l'interprétation française au canal 5. Interpretation services will be available throughout the duration of the hearing. English interpretation is available on Channel 4 and French interpretation on Channel 5. You may obtain an interpretation receiver at the back of the room. When you are in the hearing room, we would ask that you please turn off and not only put on vibration mode your cell phones and Blackberries, as they cause interference on the internal communication systems used by our translators and interpreters. We would appreciate your cooperation in this regard throughout the hearing. Please note that there is extra seating in the examination room located to your left outside of the hearing room, where you can hear and see the hearing via our video conference system. In the examination room, you may consult the public documents for this hearing. The phone number for the examination room is 819-997-7998. There is a verbatim transcript of the hearing being taken by the court reporter sitting to the table on my left. If you have any questions on how to obtain all or part of this transcript, please approach the court reporter during a break. Please note that the transcript for the public portion of the hearing will be posted on the Commission's website. And finally, the Commission is placing on the public record of this proceeding a document entitled Globalive Ownership Structure. Copies are available in the public examination room. We will now proceed with the presentations in the order of appearance set out in the agenda. Each participant will make their presentation, followed by questions by the hearing panel. And now, Mr. Chairman, we will proceed with item 1 on the agenda. I would now invite Globalive to make its presentation. Appearing for Globalive is Mr. Anthony Lacavera. Please introduce your colleagues, including anyone participating via video conference, and you will then have 45 minutes for your presentation. Mr. Lacavera?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners Katz and Menzies, and members of the CRTC staff. I am Anthony Lacavera, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Globalive Communications, and I am the controlling shareholder in AAL Holdings, the major Canadian investor in Globalive Wireless Management Corp. I'd like to introduce the other members of our witness panel. Ken Campbell is the Chief Executive Officer of Globalive Wireless Management Corp. Aldo Maruz is the Group Chief Financial Officer of Orascom Telecom, OT. Bryce Seschuk is the Chief Financial Officer of both AAL Telecom and Globalive Communications. Alex Shalabi is a member of the board of OT and an authorized representative of the board present at this hearing. Simon Lockey is the Chief Legal Officer of both AAL Telecom and Globalive Communications Corp. Bruno Ducharme, President and Chief Executive Officer of TIW Capital, is an independent director of Globalive Wireless and its holding companies. Behind me and to my left are David Dobby, Director of Legal Affairs at OT, Hank Infin, a partner of McCarthy Tatro and external regulatory counsel to the jointly owned Globalive Investment Holdings Corp., and John Andrew, a partner of Wireless Transactions. And appearing by video link from Egypt is the founder and chairman of OT, Mr. Naguib Sawiris. In addition, I'd like to introduce some of the key members of our team who are present in the room today and available to answer any questions you may have for them. Behind me and to my right is Ezio D'Onofrio, President and COO of Globalive Communications, Michael O'Connor, who owns the holding company that is the third shareholder in Globalive Investment Holdings Corp. Michel Hubert is with the corporate finance group at OT in France. Andrea Wood is the Chief Legal Officer of Globalive Wireless Management Corp. And Alaa Abdelgafar is the Access Technical Development Director at OT, and he's the leader of OT's operations support for Globalive. Lastly, Ed Anticol is the VP Regulatory Affairs for Globalive Communications. I'd now like to begin with our formal presentation. We have organized our remarks around the themes that the Commission has indicated it would like to explore today in these proceedings. First, I'd like to address the relative experience of the shareholders in Globalive Wireless. Over the past 10 years, the company I started, Globalive Communications, has grown into a successful player in a number of Canadian telecom markets. The Globalive group of companies includes Yak Communications, One Connect Services, Canopco Telecom, Globalive Carrier Services, and now Globalive Wireless, which, as the Commission knows, will be operating under the Wind brand name in Canada. Globalive provides services to over 1 million Canadian households under the Yak brand, over 3,000 hotels and hospitals in over 30 countries with Canopco, and over 5,000 businesses in North America through One Connect. Globalive Carrier Services provides wholesale billing and collection services to carriers around the world. I have started, co-founded, or provided seed funding to 7 telecom businesses to date. I'm very proud of the fact that our companies have won numerous business awards, which recognize them as being well-managed, fast-growing, successful startups, and great places to work. I had been watching the wireless space very closely, waiting for the right opportunity to get involved. During that time, we pursued joint venture discussions with a number of Canadian telcos, and investors, but none crystallized into a live venture. The AWS Spectrum auction was just that opportunity. I realized that while I had been successful in competing with TELUS, Rogers, and Bell in various niche markets, the wireless space would represent a large new challenge in terms of capital requirements and wireless expertise. So I spent a lot of time talking to potential investors and strategic partners. This included alternative Canadian and foreign partners. In particular, I had in-depth discussions with an Icelandic company called Novator. Ultimately, those discussions fell through. OT was the ideal partner for us. It had a substantial amount of experience launching wireless businesses internationally. It had access to the necessary startup capital. But most importantly, OT and its founder, Naguib Sawiris, share my entrepreneurial spirit and passion for innovation. I recognized that Globalive could successfully match OT's wireless experience and financial clout with our own Canadian telecommunications experience and our existing Globalive businesses. So I met with OT and we agreed that we would develop a new and innovative approach to bringing a new competitive wireless offering to Canadians. Finally, just as the Spectrum auction started, Novator dropped out of our consortium. We agreed on a three-way deal between AAL, OT, and Michael O'Connor, who had acted as the important intermediary during the early days of our venture. We struck a deal on how to proceed with the venture in a manner that would give us the flexibility we needed to get the business launched quickly and successfully. It also gave us flexibility to pursue additional and alternative financing for the business on an ongoing basis. Both OT and I instructed our lawyers and other advisors to develop a corporate structure that suited our different needs as investors and that complied with Canadian law. Mr. Chairman, you will understand from what I have said that my business relationship with OT only crystallized in the last few days before the auction. In fact, Novator was still part of our consortium when the first bids were made for the Spectrum prices. No one knew how high the auction fees might go. There was a huge amount of risk for all of us, and we were very cautious about our relationship. That was then. We have now had over a year of working together. We have deepened our business relationship and become much more comfortable with each other. As with any good partners, we have continued to look for ways to improve our relationship. To that end, I am pleased to say that we have just agreed to make a few changes to our shareholder arrangements. Since these changes are relevant to some of the issues we will be discussing today and in these proceedings, and since they are quite simple to describe, I will do that now. First, we have decided that I will take over the role of chairman of the boards of both the wireless operating company, Globalive Wireless Management Corp., and its holding companies. Second, I have agreed to remove from our agreement the withdrawal right, which permitted me to extract the wireline business from our joint venture during the first year after the grant of Spectrum licenses. In addition, we have agreed that I will not be entitled to exercise the rights I had to put my shares, and OT will give up its right to call my shares. I do not expect to ever exercise my put right, which was put in place as an exit mechanism to help deal with any irreconcilable differences. But now I have agreed that we will definitely not exercise the put or call rights in the first 3-year period. Mr. Chairman, we would be pleased to answer any questions about these changes after our presentation. We respect the Commission's authority to conduct this review of our ownership and control. We have cooperated fully in this hearing process and have provided the Commission and our competitors with a great deal of information about our business. However, while it was undoubtedly not the Commission's intent, the incumbents have turned this review process into an adversarial one, with the single-minded purpose of trying to prevent us from being able to compete with them. Despite the considerable uncertainty raised by this hearing process, we have continued to build our business and to hire employees. We plan to launch our new wireless services as soon as possible following your review. We are hopeful that, like Industry Canada, you will find our arrangements fully compliant. We look forward to working with you to complete your review as expeditiously as possible. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I would now like to direct your attention to the video monitor and Mr. Naguib Sawiris, who will now address you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address you, members of the Commission. My name is Naguib Sawiris. I'm the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Orascom Telecom. I will comment on some of the matters which are the subject of your hearing and also provide my perspective on the Canadian market and my reasons for agreeing to invest I would say, in Canada. Orascom Telecom agreed to partner with Tony Lacavera's company for two main reasons. First, the potential in the Canadian market was obvious. Second, Tony and his team impressed us as being the right co-investors for us in Canada. The Canadian wireless market is significantly underpenetrated at 62% penetration. Canada lags behind the US by 3 years, which translates into about 7 million missing subscribers. In addition, the incumbent wireless operators in Canada have very high ARPUs. We were also attracted by the fact that the Canadian government announced a strong pro-competitive policy for new wireless competition. This was clear to us with the setting aside of AWS spectrum for new entrants, and with the mandatory roaming and tower sharing rules, which has not been so successful to date to implement, by the way, due to the resistance from the incumbents to cooperate, I would say. I understand that the incumbents are arguing that OT somehow controls Globalive. That is not true. I knew from day one that OT cannot control Globalive. I told our legal and finance team from the outset to work with Tony and his team to fully comply with your ownership and control rules. You may be wondering why OT invests as much as it has in Canada when it does not have control. There are several reasons. We know that it is the only way a non-Canadian company is allowed to invest in Canada. That's the obvious reason. So we wanted to be sure we had a partner we could trust. I met with Tony personally, and that's where I spent most of my time. I wanted to be sure that if we are going to entrust someone with the control of a company, I need to be sure that he is the right person, and he has the right criteria, and he has the right merit. Tony has impressed me as being an honest, young, and very ambitious entrepreneur. He was the partner I was looking for. I met him and liked him. It's important for me. I'm not a good partner when the chemistry doesn't work. I always judge my feeling towards a person. Tony is a real entrepreneur and builder. I liked the fact that he was as ambitious as I was at his age. I still am at my age, but I think that should be a proof that why I ventured into a difficult venture like that one. I also believe that our independent board members, like Bruno Ducharme, as well as Ken Campbell as CEO, will help protect and grow our investment. These are individuals with a successful track record in the telecom business. I'm not the right person to talk about the details of our investment structure and the legal documents. I left the development of those details to Mr. Aldo Mareus, my Chief Financial Officer, David, and the Orascom Telecom team. Orascom Telecom is a large publicly listed company, and our management always presents the interests of our board based of shareholders. While I certainly trust Tony, of course, the OT legal and finance teams work to try and secure the usual minority shareholder protection rights in accordance with your rules. This is not an attempt by OT to control Globalive Wireless, but rather simply reflects good corporate governance and usual market practices. We owe it to our own shareholders to do that. Orascom Telecom is not very happy about having become the main financial sponsor of the Globalive Wireless business, especially in this financial crisis that has dried all the cash around us. We would more than welcome additional Canadian capital. I might add that which we have sought fiercely with no success till now. I am, however, more optimistic in the future. However, the reality is that after we invested in the spectrum auction, we ran into a severe, I would say not we, but the world ran into a severe financial crisis, which has prevented us from obtaining other financing or reasonable terms. I have done some roadshows myself, and it was like talking to an empty box. Market conditions have been awful since then, and it has been impossible to raise capital anywhere in the world. That said, I strongly believe that final regulatory clearance, improved markets, and the imminent launch of Globalive service, which I might add was done under a lot of risks from our side, taking this process which we had, I must say, not envisaged to be as lengthy and thorough as it is, it will provide a good platform for raising additional money in the future. Orascom Telecom does not want to be the sole lender or the primary lender for the Globalive wireless business, and is doing it out of necessity and not of conviction. That is not our business model. We are not in the lending business, and I want to emphasize that. However, our reputation and integrity forces us many times to prove that we care very much for our image and integrity, and therefore we did that. I want to reduce Globalive's reliance on our debt financing as quickly as I can, but to date we have no other options. As you will hear from Bryce, Aldo, and others, our efforts to reduce the venture's dependence on OT's capital are well underway, but any artificial deadlines or restrictions would only make the task more difficult, if not impossible. And the most critical element of a mobile company's success is speed to market. If we are to compete efficiently, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us that CRTC compliance process be completed as soon as possible. The fact that we have continued to invest regardless of these issues shows our determination not to deprive the Canadian consumers from a new competitor in the market while complying to all your regulations, which we respect and intend to adhere to completely. Thank you very much. That completes my remarks.
Thank you, Naguib. Thank you, Naguib. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Bruno Descharmes to say a bit more about the relative experience issue. Bruno is one of the independent directors of Globalive Wireless and its holding companies, and he is one of the real luminaries of the global wireless industry. Bruno?
Thanks, Tony. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I have some experience dating close to 20 years at telecommunications, wireless, and I have some perspective on the issues of size and competitiveness and competitive intensity in markets. I also have some perspective on the criteria for success in mobile competition, namely entrepreneurial management style, financial and operating discipline, and last but not least, consistent and continuous access to capital markets. I'd like to make a few comments about these points. Really, from a Canadian perspective, I'm born and bred in Canada, but I've operated around the world. As far back as 1992, I assisted in setting up a small company which had a CT2 plus license called Canada Pop Phone. Commissioner Katz will remember that company from way back when. Well, that company became Microcell a couple of years later and successfully applied for and won the license to be a PCS operator in Canada, alongside ClearNet, obviously, and those two new entrants played a very big role in introducing genuine competition in Canada and low prices, obviously. Both of these companies had a brilliant start. Both of them went public actually pretty quickly, soon after launch. This was an environment where obviously customers in Canada had plenty of choice. We had Bell Mobility, we had Rogers Cantel, we had BCTel, we had AGT, we had Microcell, and obviously we had ClearNet. Unfortunately, the telecom bubble collapse in 2001 was unkind to Microcell, which found itself in a tough refinancing spot in 2003, 2004, and was eventually absorbed by Rogers, that is after a hostile bid from TELUS. And ClearNet was a little bit more lucky, or at least their shareholders, as they sold out to TELUS. If you'll recall, that was George Cope at the time, who was the CEO of ClearNet and moved on to TELUS, now with BCE. The upshot of all of this, of course, is that the competitive environment shrank dramatically, and the competitive experiment fell short. And I would say that it's not because managers were not good, it's not because they didn't have the discipline. I'd say that access to markets was really the thing that changed the environment here in Canada. In the mid-90s, I left the Canadian telecom scene to start up a new company called TIW. We started from scratch and won licenses in the late 90s in China, India, Brazil, Romania, Czech Republic. We did a number of startups, six or more startups. We had a fortunate outcome. We sold the company in 2004, 2005 to Vodafone for more than $5 billion. At the time, we had about 7 million customers, which by Canadian standards is pretty big, but obviously globally it's pretty small, especially when compared to the type of people that we were competing against, such as Orange, that is France Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, Telefonica, and others. Each of these players has about 100 million customers worldwide. But one of the things that I appreciated from that experience was what it takes to succeed internationally or in any new market. You need good entrepreneurial managers, you need entrepreneurial vision, you need operating and financial discipline, and again, you need timely, consistent access to capital markets. Since my retirement in 2005, I actually continued working pretty much as hard as I ever have. I've continued to act as a strategic advisor and a partner in various mobile ventures around the world alongside private equity groups in Japan, in Greece, Lithuania, Latvia, and Austria. And in all of these cases, in all of these markets, it's the same story. We're competing against very big players. And in all cases, our operating companies are independent companies, independent of large multinational groups. And in each case, our success rests entirely on the people that we have at the front line. Talented executives, they are the people who make the difference. In a way, you might say they're the people who control the business. As you will have found in the evidence, one of the people who used to work with me in Lithuania and Latvia was none other than Ken Campbell, who moved on from Lithuania and Latvia to head up Globalive, and previously was an executive in our group in Romania. Mr. Tony and Naguib asked me to join because my experience is absolutely relevant to the issues that we have here in the Canadian market. I've got experience in Canada, I've got experience elsewhere. And my desire, my intention is to continue to serve the interests, not of any one shareholder, but the interests of the company, to ensure that it remains compliant with Canadian regulation, and of course that it succeeds in the market. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Katz, Commissioner Menzies. My name is Ken Campbell, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Globalive Wireless. We understand that you would like some confirmation of who is actually running the Globalive Wireless business. As CEO, I run the business on a day-to-day basis, but I don't do it alone. I have my board, I have my shareholders. Most importantly, as we speak, there are over 260 men and women across this country building a brand new wireless network. Since I was appointed CEO last November 1st, we've assembled an exceptional management team, a team of highly motivated people who are intent on bringing a better wireless experience to Canadians. These people are making operational decisions every day, all of them. For major strategic decisions, it is my responsibility, as with all CEOs, to seek the guidance and support of shareholders and my board. For my team, the 8 key members of my team, all of whom, except one, are Canadians, include Chris Robbins, who's from Edmonton. He has overall responsibility for our commercial operations. Chris worked with me at Vodafone and TIW. Our CFO, who just started today, is Heather Gomes, who was previously with Bell and Virgin Mobile. Our Chief Legal Officer, who is here with us, is Andrea Wood. Andrea was previously with Bennett Jones and with Alliance Atlantis. Our Chief Technical Officer is Marius Armienka, who is a Romanian national. Mary has previously worked for OT on building several greenfield sites in other parts of the world. Our head of HR, Christina Saunders, was previously with Virgin Mobile. Our head of procurement, Magid Wadi, a Canadian, was previously with Wind in Italy. Our head of customer operations, Larry Austin, was previously with MTS Allstream and with the Canadian military. Finally, our chief information officer is Scott Waller, who previously had headed successful online businesses and software businesses here in Ottawa. We are currently hiring, Mr. Chairman, up to 300 additional positions right now for our stores and for our call centers. My objective in accepting this position as CEO has been and remains very simple: to launch and to run a successful wireless business that will compete effectively in the marketplace and will, in return, generate exceptional value for my shareholders. Mr. Chairman, the capital investment required for a national wireless startup is well over $1 billion. Since there is a limited amount of venture capital in Canada, I think everyone expected that international debt and international equity would come to our market during the auction. All Canadian telecom carriers clearly have to comply with the guidelines set out in the Telecommunications Act. However, neither that Act nor the government spectrum policies excluded foreign capital or investment. Now, as Naguib has explained, last year's credit crunch has forced us to rely on more shareholder debt than is optimal. For management, our interest is frankly in building equity and not simply servicing debt. My mandate includes building a stronger balance sheet for this business to allow it to grow without compromising the initial investments that each of the founding shareholders has made. This is a difficult task, and it's made all the more complex by the regulatory process and by the current macroeconomic conditions. While we do have a strong management team, we're also fortunate that we can rely on our shareholders for advice and for expertise in a number of areas. Understandably, AAL and Tony's advice is largely related to the Canadian telecom market. OT's advice is related to matters in which its international relationships and its perspective can add value, areas such as procurement. Under our technical services agreement, we are entitled to seek technical advice from OT. The agreement clearly provides for OT to provide advisory services only. In practice, OT has provided very helpful advice to Globalive Wireless on a number of technical matters. It has provided useful input, especially in our ongoing negotiations with suppliers and vendors. A major source of value added from OT has been its ability to leverage its relationships with suppliers to ensure that the prices we secure are as low as possible and that system specifications are particularly relevant to our needs. This helps us, sir, in maintaining and building a strong and a lean and a competitive operation. We've now entered into comprehensive turnkey equipment services agreements with 2 major vendors. These companies are now a primary source of advice on technical and on operational issues. OT, for its part, continues to play a role in advising our departments, our technical and our IT departments, on issues related to vendor management. But this requirement has subsided as we've built our strong internal team here in Canada over the last several months. As well, the vendors themselves play an active role in the implementation and the rollout of our network. Going forward, we do not expect to have anyone from OT full-time here in Canada, although we will likely request specialized staff for short-term secondments or for brief working visits as the need arises. OT will continue to be a source of specialized technical advice on wireless operational matters, as will AAL. However, operational decisions will be made by Globalive's Canadian management, with advice from vendors and various consultants that we engage from time to time. Finally, we were pleased to be able to persuade our non-Canadian investor to license the Wind brand. This license is on extremely favorable terms, with absolutely no strings attached in terms of influence or control. The brand licensing agreement will translate into significant savings for Globalive Wireless. It will allow us to leverage their relationships and piggyback on the wind purchases.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to now turn your attention to the arrangements between the shareholders. I'd like to now turn to a discussion of the business deal between the shareholders. The essence of the deal works like this. My company and OT agreed just before the deadline for bidding that we would co-invest and cooperate together to bid in the auction. I agreed to contribute my interest in Globalive Communications Corp as equity capital in the business in the wireless venture. OT contributed cash as equity to buy out minority shareholders in Globalive. And since we were literally on the eve of the auction when we made our deal, OT also agreed to loan the venture sufficient funds to pay for the spectrum auction fees. We then asked our lawyers and financial advisors to develop a transaction structure that reflected the interests of OT and AAL, as well as those of Michael O'Connor, a Canadian who had been working with OT and who was instrumental in the plan for the new wireless venture. I'd like to ask Mr. Aldo Maruz, the Group CFO of OT, to give his company's perspective on the arrangements between the shareholders.
Thank you, Tony. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners Katz and Menzies, it's a pleasure to be here with you today to speak for OT in relation to its investment in Globalive Wireless. OT is not as old and well-established a company as TELUS, Rogers, and Bell, but we are proud of what the company has achieved to date. Our vision is to become one of the world's leading telecom operators, providing the best quality services to our customers, value to our shareholders, and a dynamic, challenging, and fun environment for our employees. We saw Tony and his company as a good match for our entrepreneurial corporate culture. We like the fact that, like OT, he has significant experience in starting up new ventures, and, unlike us, doing it in Canada. So we agreed to develop a joint project with him. He came to us with a proposal to jointly pursue this opportunity. His track record and enthusiasm won us over, together with the good market analysis prepared by his team. Now I would ask my colleague Mr. Alex Shalaby, member of the Board of Directors, to introduce himself.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. As Aldo has said, I'm a member of the Board and Chairman of the Egyptian company for mobile service, Mobinia, a member of the Board of OT. I was involved in the discussion with our CEO and with other board members on the opportunity to participate in this new venture. I was authorized by resolution of the board to represent them at the hearing. You have since asked our chairman, Mr. Sawiris, to participate as well. And like him, I would be pleased to answer any questions you have about our investment in Globalive Wireless. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning. I am the Chief Legal Officer of both Globalive Communications and its various subsidiaries, and also of AAL Holdings, of which I am also a shareholder. It is in this capacity that I am appearing before you today. I also fulfilled the same role for Globalive Wireless until recently, when Andrea Wood joined as its full-time Chief Legal Officer. The ownership structure being reviewed today began developing when the parties first met. At that time, they identified a mutual interest as partners in proceeding to the AWS auction and entered into an investment agreement intended to set certain parameters and procedures around their relationship in that auction. The focus at that time was on getting to a point where the parties were comfortable proceeding to the auction and letting this new relationship mature and develop. This it did. Over the course of the auction and after, and a complete set of finalized and executed ownership and control documentation was filed with Industry Canada following the auction's completion. This set of documentation underwent a thorough and lengthy review by Industry Canada. The documents themselves went through various changes and iterations as part of that process, leading to an ultimate determination of compliance with the applicable rules and restrictions. It was this set of documents that was submitted very shortly after for the Commission's review. This context is relevant to understanding the structure overall, especially as regards the various entities and the shareholder rights and obligations. Our structure has been described as complex, but in reality, in our view, it is straightforward. It is the result of a protracted series of negotiations involving numerous parties, including the Government of Canada, at various stages. The Commission will also appreciate that the ownership structure needed to be flexible enough to reflect the combination of an established wireline business that comprised the majority of our net worth with a new, capital-intensive startup wireless business with brand new partners that we got to know very well, very quickly. For example, the existing shareholders agreement provide for a right, which we have recently given up, to extract the wireline business in the first year following license issuance. Understanding that right is not difficult when you understand the context in which the agreements were drafted. Of course, operating within the confines of the applicable ownership and control restrictions, the structure, composition, and membership qualifications of the boards of each entity and the governance regime of each company ensures that under all circumstances, the right directors are in place, while control and decision-making authority resides with the majority of independent Canadians. As with every other aspect of the structure, these provisions were reviewed at length by Industry Canada. They suggested some changes, which we made. Similarly, there are required shareholder approvals and shareholder veto rights. These operate in precisely the same way and with precisely the same intent as such provisions in virtually all shareholders' agreements I've ever worked on. These vetoes and required approvals were also carefully scrutinized and in some cases adjusted by Industry Canada to ensure compliance with the applicable restrictions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bryce Seschuk. I am the Chief Financial Officer of Globalive Communications Corp. And also of AAL Holdings, of which I am also a shareholder. I also fulfilled the same role for Globalive Wireless from its inception until recently when Ms. Gomes joined as its full-time CFO. I will begin with a description of the financing of Globalive Wireless. I would like to thank the Commission for properly ruling that the information we have filed about our specific past, present, and future financing plans is to be treated confidentially. This information is clearly very competitively sensitive, and disclosing it would affect our future financing negotiations. So we will be limiting our discussion today to issues on the public record. First, we would like to address the fact that OT, in addition to its equity investment, holds most of the outstanding debt financing in Globalive Wireless. As you have already heard, both OT and AAL had planned to rely heavily on external financing to capitalize the Globalive Wireless business and to implement its business plan. The shareholders' agreement clearly authorizes GIHC to complete equity financings in amounts sufficient to implement the company's business plan and to refinance the shareholders' startup financing. The OT loans are in the nature of startup financing. OT advanced these funds on a quick basis soon after the shareholders agreed to team up to bid in the AWS Spectrum auction. This was necessary in order to meet the auction requirements and cover startup operational costs. These loans are meant to provide interim financing only. After the AWS auction was completed in August 2008, we pursued external financing to fund the network rollout and business startup. Details of these financing discussions have been provided to the Commission in confidence. Unfortunately, Globalive's external financing efforts coincided with the most significant business and consumer spending contraction and credit crunch since the 1930s. OT, AAL, and the management team of Globalive Wireless are fully committed to replacing the OT bridge loans and to attracting additional debt and equity financing. These efforts will be facilitated by the removal of the regulatory uncertainty once the Commission completes its review. In addition, the project will clearly be more capable of attracting both external debt as well as equity capital on reasonable commercial terms once there are predictable cash flows from the business. Mr. Marus.
Thank you, Bryce. As you've heard from Mr. Sewiris, OT is completely committed to getting out of its loan to Globalive Wireless as soon as possible. We're not interested in remaining the major lender of the project. Our cost of capital is much higher than that of a bank. We want to leverage other people's money, not our own. So any suggestion that we are happy about it or we want to delay replacing our loans with other capital is simply incorrect. Interest rates on the OT bridge loans are reasonable and market-based rates. This is clearly not the type of venture that could be financed by a bank loan. In fact, when the loan agreements were advanced, OT itself was rated single B+. It has since been downgraded to single B. Any suggestion that the interest rates of the bridge loans are high doesn't accurately reflect the level of risk involved in a greenfield wireless startup. Finally, Mr. Chairman, we noticed that some concerns have been expressed about OT using its loan as a means of controlling the Globalive wireless business. Anyone who has examined the actual terms of our loan agreement would quickly realize that it has no covenants or other restrictions that could be used to exercise control over the business. It is consistent with, but contains even fewer restrictions than our shareholder agreements.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I will briefly speak about the legal and policy framework for a Section 16 review. There are two parts to the Canadian ownership and control test set out in Section 16 of the Telecom Act. As you said, Mr. Chairman, the first involves purely quantitative thresholds on voting shares and board seats. No one disagrees that Globalive Wireless structure is fully compliant with those thresholds. So the only question is whether Globalive Wireless complies with the requirement that, quote, a corporation is not otherwise controlled by persons that are non-Canadians. Note that the law does not say that it must be shown that a company is controlled by Canadians, but that it is not controlled by non-Canadians. So in effect, to find a company ineligible to operate under Section 16, it must be positively demonstrated that a company is controlled by non-Canadians. And the Commission will recognize, of course, that this test is different from the test that's set out in broadcasting law. The Telecommunications Act defines control in fact as, quote, control in any manner that results in control in fact, whether directly through the ownership of securities or indirectly through a trust, agreement, or other arrangement, the ownership of any body corporate or otherwise. So the question to address, we would respectfully submit, is whether there is any direct or indirect arrangement, etc., that demonstrably allows OT to control Globalive Wireless. The Commission has indicated that it considers the appropriate test for assessing control in fact is the one set out in the NTA's Canadian Airlines decision. In that decision, the NTA found that control in fact generally can be viewed as the ongoing power or ability, whether exercised or not, to determine the strategic direct decision-making activities of an enterprise, or it can also be viewed as the ability to manage and run the day-to-day operations of an enterprise. However, the Canadian Airlines decision also states that, quote, minority shareholders and their designated directors normally have the ability to influence a company, as do others, such as bankers and employees. The influence which can be exercised either positively or negatively by way of veto rights needs to be dominant or determining, however, for it to translate into control in fact. Based on this, it is clear that the proper test to apply in a case like Globalive's is to ask whether the non-Canadian investor demonstrably has the ability to unilaterally determine strategic decision-making or to dominate decisions related to the day-to-day operations of an enterprise. The ability to influence strategy or operations is not enough. If it is not demonstrable to you that OT has the clear power to determine or dominate such decisions, then it cannot be found to exercise control in fact, according to the Canadian Airlines decision and similar precedents. Finally, I would like to summarize 4 legal, regulatory, and policy principles that we submit the Commission should consider in assessing whether a non-Canadian demonstrably controls a Canadian carrier. First, as the Commission has stated in the past, the matter of determining control in fact is one of fact. Each situation will inevitably raise special concerns. Each will have to be decided on its own particular facts and on a case-by-case basis. it is neither possible nor practical to develop a rigid template for specific ownership or control arrangements like vetoes or board memberships, which must be applied in all cases. Market participants should be free to develop new approaches to structuring their investments in telecom carriers. Second, it is the policy of the Government of Canada to promote wireless competition by introducing new entrants to the wireless markets. Industry Canada has already made a clear finding, as you said, Mr. Chairman, finding that Globalive Wireless is compliant with the Canadian ownership and control rules. In this context, where two regulatory agencies operate under two statutes that are really part of the same regulatory scheme, the case law suggests that the regulators should carry out their responsibilities in a manner that, quote, presumes a harmony, coherence, and consistency between the statutes dealing with the same subject matter. Third, the Canadian ownership and control rules set out in Section 16 only apply to companies that are operating as telecommunications common carriers, which Globalive will recognize as not today. The rules do not apply to any pre-operational arrangements or work. We have heard some suggestions that if a venture like Globalive Wireless had certain pre-launch problems, then they can never be resolved later. That's simply wrong as a matter of law. The time for determining control, in fact, is once a carrier is operational. Finally, as a matter of policy, we should keep in mind that many, if not most, Canadian telecom carriers were started by or heavily financed in their early years by foreign investors. This includes Bell Canada, TELUS, Unitel Allstream, and many more recent wireline and wireless startups. Due to the constraints of our small capital markets, Canadian consumers owe a great debt to non-Canadian entrepreneurs and financial sponsors for helping to establish our industry and to keep it competitive. The last policy argument should obviously not cause the Commission to ignore the law. However, Section 16 provides the Commission with substantial discretion to determine what is required to comply with the law in each case. So we are submitting respectfully that the Commission should keep in mind the policy context and not exercise its discretion to scare off the type of non-Canadian risk capital that has helped to establish and to maintain the competitiveness of our telecom industry.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, that concludes our opening presentation. Our team is now available to answer any questions you may have. Given the number of representatives we have here, I think the best way to proceed is for you to address any general questions to me. I will either answer them myself or pass them on to the appropriate member of our team. You may, of course, choose to ask specific questions to specific members of our team. Thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to your questions.